It was funny to see
Yeah, so I usually, well, yes, offline.
That's okay.
So we'll go to beaches more, Massachusetts and larger. And if you go south, you get always have this big where in August the water will be like around 70. Yeah, that's how it is. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Last minute, we were already in like.
Where's, is everybody in place? Don't know where John is. It's like, yeah, that was like when I was a teacher, like, yeah, like, we would like take our time.
Okay, if we can take our seats so we can get started. We're 5 minutes late. We want to be as prompt as we can be, folks. Good morning. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Linda Smith. I work here at the Bipartisan Policy Center directing the Early Childhood Initiative. What we're going to be talking about today are early childhood facilities and the need to really take this issue very seriously. As many of you know, the Bipartisan Policy Center is a Washington, D.C. based think tank that's dedicated to bipartisanship in this country, trying to take the ideas from both sides of the aisle to create better policies for everyone. And I think that one of the things that I know we all know is that child care in particular is a critical issue for this country. So it's very appropriate that the Bipartisan Policy Center be engaged in this and work on this in a manner that brings the ideas to the table, which is what we're trying to do here today. There's no more pressing issue in this country for child care than the need for facilities. And as we get into this, I think you're going to start to see what we're up against as we move forward. With us in this work, we have had over 40 organizations from across the country, national, local, and state organizations, both public and private, who have worked with us on this initiative of facilities and the challenges that we face. And I want to, before we do anything, thank all of them, those here in the room and those watching from across the country, because this work has been truly bipartisan and a collaborative approach. Not always easy, as those who have worked on it with us know, but certainly we have come together in a way that is, I think, going to promote early childhood facilities for the country. And today you will meet some of them on the panel that you will hear from, but many of the rest of them are still out there, and I can't thank them enough. Wanted to talk to you a little bit about the first product of this group. We put together what we call the Early Childhood Facilities Framework, more or less a policy guide for how we as a group of people interested in the issue would move forward on it. And so you see that. We've handed that document out. For those of you watching remotely, it's available online. That policy document framework is now guiding the work that we are doing across this country. So it was an important document. Again, not the easiest thing that we took on, but we certainly got there with it, and everyone agreed. I think we had over 20 organizations sign on to that document with us. Many people that work with us are public and cannot sign documents, so while they worked on it, they can't sign on to it, just so you know. So the facilities issue is real in this country, and I think some of us know that more than others. Having been out and working on this issue for so many years, I tell you, I have seen it all. And it really does exist out there. We have a serious problem when it comes to facilities. What you're going to see on the screen now are photos taken from unannounced inspections done by the Health and Human Services Inspector General's office. This was done just a few short years ago, and these are real pictures of what they found in 9 states around this country. Serious conditions that are really, not anything that this nation should be proud of or should put up with. I am always struck by what was said in the first meeting that we had here, and that was Adia Brown from the Office of Head Start actually said, we have a culture of it's just good enough in this country for early childhood facilities. And we can do better than that, folks. So I think the other thing we talk about, we have a culture within early childhood of low expectations. We don't think that we or our children deserve better, and they do. And I think we'll be spending some time talking about that in the panel that you see. So what we are going to do today is you will hear from a panel of people who have taken this on and that have been part of the working group. You'll hear from people, I love to say from Patricia is our real person here, from someone who's experienced this here in D.C. And you will hear about what we call here at BPC the big ask. What we want, our first effort to work with Congress to get funding for early childhood facilities in this country. So I think this will be an interesting panel for all of you to hear from. They come from a variety of areas around the country. They represent center-based programs, family child care programs, higher education and their efforts at one university, and the philanthropic community and what they are doing. So we've tried to present the spectrum of what's going on. Finally, and just before I introduce the next speaker, I want to call attention to a document that we're releasing today, and that is from the ground up. And that document contains other ideas, the ones that you'll hear today, as well as ideas from around the country on how communities and organizations have stood up to the challenge on facilities in their communities. We tried to get a broad spectrum of things in this catalog that you will see. There are many more ideas out there, and the final thing I say before we move on is if you have other ideas after you've seen the document, please share them, because we want to continue to share with people around the country how communities and organizations have handled this problem. So without further ado, I'm going to I'm going to introduce our next two speakers so they can come up in order. First, Nicole Barcliffe, and I don't think, Nicole, we could have done any of this without her wisdom and all of her guidance, especially around the policy work. Nicole is a policy director at LISC, the Local Initiatives Support Corporation, a long title there. And she's a national expert in policy around this issue, but she has been a supporter every step of the way to the work that we've done on the framework and the policy statement. Following her will be Patricia Brown, President and CEO of the National Children's Center here in Washington, D.C., and she will summarize her experiences and challenges of working through a major construction program here with the help of many in her community. So, Nicole, you want to?
Thank you, Linda, for the introduction. LISC is very proud and happy to be a part of this conversation as a community development financial institution and nonprofit whose mission it is to build resilient communities of choice and opportunity, good places to live, work, and raise families. We see the need and the effect of child care and early learning facilities in our communities. Since about 1995, we've invested about $57 million, creating about 223 facilities around the country. And we're a part of this discussion because, like you and like our other cross-sector partners, we believe these things that Linda really emphasized before. All children, that means children in urban and rural areas, from every zip code, from every socioeconomic status, from every race, from every ethnicity, from any other demographic feature that you can think of, all children deserve equal access to high-performing early learning facilities. We believe that early learning providers, our teachers and instructors, and our teachers' aides deserve to work in physical environments that are safe and do not undermine quality programming. We also believe that working families deserve to be assured that children are being cared for in safe and high-functioning spaces. Our children and early learning providers deserve spaces that promote all of the qualities that we would like to see reflected in our communities, including self-respect and dignity. As proud as I am to be a part of LISC, we're not alone in this work. There's a large network of other community development financial institutions who do this work for the same reason. And so for decades, we've been trying to move this issue forward and are very pleased to be a part of the BPC working group. One of the things that we'll talk about is how do we articulate the need and how did we come to this work? So we know that facilities influence development. Why are the facilities and physical spaces so important? They're important because we know that early childhood is a critical development period and that facilities are an important aspect of the learning environment. The settings where children learn, play, and grow profoundly influence their development. So what do we mean when we say this? So design elements that promote development and teacher effectiveness and productivity include natural lighting, child-sized toilets that promote independence, entry space to allow for engagements with teachers and children, appropriate acoustics that aid children's memory and attention, and outdoor spaces that promote physical activity and reduce depression. All of these factors are significant contributors to the experience of early learning, children in early learning settings and their providers. Unfortunately, most childcare and early learning facilities are not designed to meet children's developmental needs. Many facilities fail to meet basic health and safety standards. So the 2015 OIG report that Linda referenced found that across 10 states, 96% of programs inspected had one or more potentially hazardous condition. These are basic health and safety conditions that are supposed to exist in facilities. And the photos that you see on the slide show a protruding outlet and exposed pipes in a playground area. Furthermore, the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, reports that about 500,000 child care facilities are not regulated for lead in their drinking water. Only 9 states and New York City require facilities to test their drinking water for lead. If you're curious about what they are, they're on the slides, but they're California, Connecticut, Illinois, Maine, New Hampshire, New Jersey, Oregon, Rhode Island, and Washington State. So what is the actual comprehensive early learning facilities needs? And as people who are interested in policy, how do we even begin to address it? States have been trying to figure this out and grappling with this issue, as have some local communities. They've been partnering with intermediaries and other nonprofits and other entities who are interested in this space to adequately assess, understand, quantify, and develop plans to address facilities needs. Here are a few examples. In Massachusetts, the Children's Investment Fund conducted a study. You'll see some of the outcomes of their comprehensive needs assessment, but in addition to those listed, the study also found that most programs were operating in buildings designed for another use and then later adapted into educational settings. This is not uncommon for those of you who work in childcare, for childcare spaces and for early learning spaces. You kind of move into readily available existing space. And while this isn't uncommon, what is unfortunately common is that operators lack the proper operating subsidies and dollars to adequately address the facility's adaptation issue. So in order to meet basic state requirements, they have to meet basic adaptation issues. So that's one of the major issues that underlies need. In Rhode Island, another example of a statewide needs assessment, in 2014, the Rhode Island LISC office conducted an assessment of both for-profit and nonprofit centers. We learned that all centered surveys had at least one playground violation or hazard, and nearly a quarter did not have adequately functioning heating systems in the state of Rhode Island. Asbestos exposure presented a barrier to licensing, and 1/4 of the programs that were surveyed were not in compliance with state regulations. And at the time of report, they didn't have a plan to address the problem. Now, it's important to note that both Massachusetts and Rhode Island undertook these assessments in order to figure out how to begin to adequately address the financing of the facilities issues. You'll hear more about the models for addressing need in the subsequent presentations. Another large question that people have, by now you want to know, well, this is really sounds daunting, and how much will all of this cost? And so we don't want to scare you with numbers. We believe that this is a problem that can be addressed with the proper structure and with the proper financing. Based on existing data, estimate shows that an investment of up to $17 billion is required to improve existing child care facilities. That's to bring facilities up to quality standards. Head Start report estimates that about $1.1 billion is needed to update the existing 2,201 centers that need improvement. The existing data tell us that we have a problem, although we don't know the extent of the problem. A national needs assessment that is comprehensive of facilities will help us understand the current condition and determine the cost for improving facilities to a high quality standard. So it's a big problem, but it's not insurmountable. So there are a couple, actually many examples, but we'll give you a few of what communities have done to improve early learning facilities. This is the Nursery Learning Lab in Boston, Massachusetts. The Nursery Learning Lab was in the basement of a public housing development from the 1960s through 2014. It moved to a new space with over $16 million in financing from federal, state, and local resources that were braided and blended. The new space provides child-sized equipment, natural light, and warm colors to create safe and developmentally appropriate environments for children. Another example, these photos show improvements to the kitchen at Little Scholars Development Center in Detroit. The updates in this facility include new sinks and equipment to organize supplies. If you look at the photos, it's night and day. It doesn't even look like the same facility. What a drastic change. So facilities like this are possible when we understand what facilities' needs are, dedicate money for capital improvements, and build the capacity of early learning providers so that they have the support and assistance that they need to navigate facilities improvements. Our presenters today will discuss some of these multi-sector roles and responsibility for facilities, and hopefully it'll leave you with a better sense of the role that you can play in addressing the facilities challenge. Our framework referenced by Linda defines these challenges in further detail and really outlines in a significant way the multi-sector response. Thank you all for your time and attention and for caring about this issue. I know that you're excited to hear from an actual practitioner. Our next presenter, Patricia Brown, she's the president and CEO of the National Children's Center in Washington, D.C.
Thank you so much for the introduction, and I just have to say that I am so thrilled to have the opportunity to participate in the event. More importantly, I am so thrilled that the appropriate focus and attention is now on the early learning experience, from quality early learning slots for 0 to 3 and brain development, but also on the facility piece of it. This is a piece that we have lived for a very long time in our organization, have faced many financial challenges, and I'm just thrilled to be here. So I just wanted to open up and say thank you for the opportunity. So just a little bit about NCC, because our name is misleading. The National Children's Center is a 60-year-old organization that actually supports the entire span of life, children from 0 to senior years. We have adults in their 80s with developmental and intellectual disabilities. So unlike other programs, NCC provides lifelong educational, health, and well-being community-based services for infants to seniors. So a little bit about the Early Learning Center, which we affectionately call the ELC. It is the flagship program in Ward 8 of NCC. It was built in the mid-90s. The ELC provides services to the community in a beautiful 75,000 square foot building on 4 acres of land. NCC's Early Learning and Early Intervention Center provides a full array of services to include clinical services for some of the youngest and most disadvantaged residents in our city. 98% of our children receive subsidy. We have 184 children in our center with over 200 children on our waiting list. And that's with a number of centers surrounding our facility. NCC's ELC operating model is to provide children with special needs and low-income families with child care options while the parents of the children actively seek employment and educational opportunities. Although the city subsidizes some portion of the cost of services, NCC's business model inherently comes with financial pressures. Over the years, we have realized that delivering on our mission comes with a cost. We've experienced hidden costs such as the need for security personnel and nursing staff to care for medically fragile children, and additional staff expenses required to address the needs of children needing behavior supports and children with special needs. A careful analysis of the consistent year-over-year financial losses became an area of focus and grave concern for our board of directors. To that end, we were very, very close to closing our center. because we could not afford to maintain the facility and the cost of childcare. So over our almost 30-year-old facility has its challenges with aging mechanical and inefficient operating systems. The financial pressures resulting from this challenge come to roughly $350,000 in annual utility bills alone, just in utility bills, equating to close to $7 per square foot compared to a more efficient facility at $3 a square foot. The lack of funding for facilities has caused a financial problem for us as a center. The replacement of these systems not only impacts the bottom line, but it also proposes a threat to the program itself if any failures should occur. The inability to fully understand the business model led to the decision to sell the building and face the very real possibility of closing our program. But as we looked around the Ward 8 community and looked for available facilities to accommodate us, there was nothing. So to close our facility meant that 184 babies would be displaced, 75 staff members who live in the Ward 8 community would no longer be employed, and that was just a difficult pill to swallow. So to that extent, we began to reach out and look for partners in the community. In 2015, there was an article in the Washington Post that introduced the Bainum Family Foundation. The Bainum family moved into the Washington, D.C. area and made a commitment to bridge the poverty gap and ensure that every child, regardless of what ward in the city that they lived in, would have quality early learning. We were so excited because we saw the beginning of a possible policy change in the city and financial support that we had not known before. We reached out to the Bainum Family Foundation, and fortunately we were able to receive technical support, which introduced us to the Reinvestment Fund out of Philadelphia. And they provided instructional coaches to bring our staff from NACCE Gold standards, which everyone does not have, and is a challenge in itself. But we were able to go from NACCE Gold standards to high quality early Head Start standards as a result of that coaching. So then we moved to the facility. All of our mechanical systems are at the end of their lifeline. So all of these improvements we've done to improve our quality will be for naught if the center ceases to exist. So when we look at the mechanical equipment itself, we're looking at about $3 million to replace all of the systems. When we look at the aging building, and our facility is a beautiful space, and we've maintained it, but when we look at the electricity and energy efficiency, we have over $1 million in cost to maintain the facility. That could be significantly less with upgraded electrical systems and all of those things. So we are moving forward. Our vision is to go from 184 children at our center to 248 children. We currently use about 30,000 of our 75,000 square foot space, and we're going to take 10,000 square feet of that space to create a brand new infant and toddler suite. So I said we had 184 families, but we have over 200 on the waiting list. So the opportunity to create additional space for infants and toddlers is exciting to us. But the challenge of the cost remains. So as we work on this project, we are projecting approximately $8 million in cost to do the facilities renovations and to create new space for our infants and toddlers. So you have an organization who is 98% subsidy. So we are trying to raise money to bridge the gap between what we get in subsidy and enhancing our programs. And now we have an $8 million construction project on top of that. It is insurmountable. It's not insurmountable. It's going to happen. But it is a challenge. It is a challenge. And that is why I am extremely excited about the work that is happening today. I will say that in addition to our partnership with the Bainham Family Foundation and the Reinvestment Fund, our partners at OSSI have been extremely supportive, and we have just been the recipient of pre-development funds through the LIFT grant in the mayor's program. I'm so excited I can't speak. So as a result, we now focus on the importance of the work that we do in the community and the city, with new partnerships in place to provide enhanced curriculum for our children. The ELC has become a training center for future pediatricians, social workers, nurses, clinicians, and teachers. So it's not just a matter of taking care of the children that we support. It's not just a matter of supporting the families and the community, but the future is coming through our center as a place to train and develop. But if we cannot afford to maintain the facility, it will all be for naught. So I am going to close with just a few slides. This is a picture of our facility. So I'm proud that we do not have the health and safety issues that you identified in some of your slides, but this is a 30-year-old facility. And we pray every day that the chiller doesn't die and the hot water heater doesn't go. But beautiful space. On the left side, you see our Baby Bloomers urban farm and fruit orchard. So in addition to the early learning space, 3 years ago, we built an urban farm. We have over 65 raised garden beds of every vegetable you can imagine and assorted fruit trees. Ward 8 is a food desert. There's one grocery store for over 85,000 people. Healthy food options will help us to take care of health disparities in our community. We have a garden curriculum for our children. The hope is that they will learn what good and healthy eating is about. So they've actually helped to plant some of the beds. The dragon over here is part of our gross motor skill area because we have children with and without disabilities. So our clinical staff works with the children to help them navigate. And this is the front of the building. If we can go to the next slide. So at play, you talked about outdoor play spaces. We have interior playgrounds for our infants and toddlers, and then we have an outdoor adaptive play area, all 30 years of age. The flooring needs to be replenished. The equipment is now outdated. There's a cost. So we've been trying to partner with different people to help us get the funding because outdoor play is critical. Next slide. Is that the last slide? Okay. So I am just going to close with a quote from Frederick Douglass that I hold near and dear to my heart. And it is easier to build strong children than to repair broken men. It is easier to build strong children than to repair broken men. That's why early learning is so critical. That's why the urban farm is so critical. That's why the work that we're doing today is just so very, very exciting. So thank you for this opportunity. And we do believe that good enough is not enough. And I'm excited to see the outcome of all of this work.
Well, thank you to both Patricia and Nicole for those remarks. We're going to move on now to our panel and ask our panel to please come up. As we transition to that, I just want to introduce Sarah Muncie, who is going to be moderating the panel. Sarah is co-founder of Neighborhood Villages, an organization advocating for systems change and policy change in Massachusetts and across the country. She's going to moderate the panel, as you see, and she'll introduce them just so the audience knows that you all have their bios, so we try to not take too much time in doing introductions and bios, so you have those. And before we move on to the panel, just know that for those of you in the audience, we'll be taking questions at the end of the panel. And for those of you watching online, you can tweet us your questions on BPC Live. and/or send an email to bipartisaninfo@bipartisanpolicy.org, and we'll have your questions asked of the panel. So I'm going to turn it over to Sarah and thank the panel in advance for their remarks. They're going to each give a few minutes of overview of what they do, and then we'll open it up for questions.
Thank you so much, Linda, and thank you everyone for being here. I'll introduce you to our incredible panel, and then we're really looking forward to a dynamic discussion. We have Erica Mackey, the CEO and co-founder of My Village, Teresa Jordan, Director of the Children's Facilities Finance at the Children's Investment Fund. We have Rusty Smith, the Associate Director of Rural Studio, and Eric Buchanan, the Director of Strategic Partnerships for the Buffett Early Childhood Fund. So I'll let each panelist tell you a little bit more about the work that they do before we jump into our discussion. Erica?
Sure. So it's such a pleasure to be here and be able to share a bit about our story and why we're doing what we're doing. The hat that I wear is as an entrepreneur background and also focus very much on family homes, so home-based businesses. So most families, as you probably all know, are forced into a compromise between quality and affordability, and it feels like these days, if you don't get on a wait list before you start thinking about conceiving, you're forced into this compromise. And then, while the majority of parents are paying more for childcare than they do college tuition in many of their states, the childcare workers are making less than $12 an hour. So when you put that equation together, it makes it really challenging for them to invest in the space that they're operating. It's a really large problem. There are 15 million kids in paid care under the age of 5, and more than 50% of the parents that are participating and paying for this report that they're unhappy with their current situation. So something really has to change. My co-founder and I built this company. We have experience in being entrepreneurs before. We have 3 successful mission-driven companies that we've worked on before this. My background, my last venture, we grew a company, employed over 1,000 employees, 2,500 person workforce, so we have experience with scale. And I found myself as a parent in a system where I felt like I was failing before I even had a chance to get started. So our solution is to build a national community of high-quality, home-based childcare and preschool businesses. And we do that by making it easy to start and successfully run a business out of your home. We connect you with a local mentor and a national support community incentivized to see you succeed. We also give you a business toolkit to make it easy to run your business and allows you to focus your attention on what matters, which is the kids. On averages, businesses in our community, they're earning 30% more with us because each business isn't operating as an individual business. We've now consolidated a very fragmented system. And we care deeply about the outcomes of each child in our program. So we've actually ended up franchising because it turns out that the best way to scale quality is to franchise. So we franchise the living rooms, kitchens, and backyards, which, as you can imagine, is not a cookie cutter experience, to ensure that we're really providing the support to create a quality experience for each family and care. And because all of our programs are in homes, we tap into these economies of scale, access government subsidies, help with the admin that programs who are quality wouldn't usually connect with subsidy programs to help struggling families, but they can because we make it easier for them. And then we celebrate the uniqueness of each My Village franchise, and we make it fun and rewarding for families to find and engage with those programs. So we left the coast and launched in Montana and Colorado to ensure that we are developing a solution for the average American family. And we've proven that our offer speaks to great existing educators who really want to create their own experience, but then also, more importantly, to people who are super passionate about kids and didn't ever know that they could be a business owner and an entrepreneur and an educator to do it themselves. We have about 40 schools open now between Montana and Colorado, and we're looking to add another more than 100 this year. So we're definitely on a path. We've just closed outside funding, $6 million in venture funding, which is the largest round actually for our stage in Montana's history, which is really exciting because it's for early childhood. And we're going to deliver an inspiring start at a very affordable price for over 1 million kids in care over this decade. And some of the really amazing things are that each business that's created is a mostly female-run business, and it helps 6 to 12 families go back to work with peace of mind. And when you think about the facilities investment, they're starting in their homes, and to be able to convert their facility is not a huge amount of money. It's a $2,000 to $10,000 investment for each starting point, and a lot of that is things like fencing, basic investments that allows them to convert their home into a really high quality early learning canvas. And so I'm so thrilled to be able to be a part of this conversation and bring the voice of the home-based educator, because it's such a critical piece to both the urban and rural solution set. So thank you.
Great. Thanks. Thank you for the opportunity to share the work that we're doing in Massachusetts for young children, and to talk about the importance of financing and training for those providers that are planning to do facilities projects. So since 1991, the Children's Investment Fund has helped build nonprofit early learning providers' effectiveness and resilience through intensive and targeted technical assistance, training, and financing. We recently became a certified community development financial institution, so we're very excited about that. We offer pre-development, acquisition, and permanent financing, and we are affiliated with CEDAC, which is the Community Economic Development Assistance Corporation that provides technical assistance and financing to nonprofit housing developers. Over the 20 years that we've been providing a training, we've learned that training coupled with financing is crucial to providers gaining the knowledge and skills that are needed to take on a facilities project. It's a huge undertaking for sure, and Patricia, I know you're about to embark on that. As we know, early learning providers are in the business of educating children. They are not real estate developers. And you also, a major capital project is not something that most childcare providers have ever done. So there is an intense need for technical assistance as well as financing, and specifically pre-development financing. So in 2001, we developed a 4-day residential training. Yes, residential, you have to stay there. And the importance of that, is to get the attention of providers. It's really difficult if providers are, they need to be on the phone, if you're senior management or your board members. And so to be at a site where you are concentrating on what it means to take on a facilities project is really, really important. We have your undivided attention at that point. So staff leadership and board members attend because that shared experience and knowledge gained is critical for planning your project. And the content of Building Stronger Centers during that 4-day period is really to focus on 4 major areas. The first is conceptual planning and early feasibility, and that really is the very critical stage where you're determining, is this a project that you can actually do, and what are the things that are necessary to start in terms of the pre-development needs. But backing up from that, just who are your stakeholders, which are your board, your staff, the children, the community, and really understanding what that means and what this project will mean for that community. Financial and organizational readiness. Is the organization ready to take on this project? Do they have the financial capacity to sustain a capital project, to buy a building? And it depends on sort of the subsidies, your operating budget, and your ability to really manage that project long term. And then there's financing and design. So what are the financial resources that are available? Do you have a design? Do you have an architect who has experience designing space? What are the issues in your space that need to be addressed? So it's important for us to have program directors also at that training because they're in the space all day, so they know exactly what the needs are. And then the last piece is the management of the real estate development process. Managing a construction project is incredible, and there's a lot of meetings, and you're at the site with the contractor and your team on a weekly basis, and that takes away time from the day-to-day operations of the center. And so it's really important to understand what that entails. So during that 4-day process, providers have access to highly skilled consultants, architects, financing experts, and providers who have successfully completed their projects. So we have providers that have done a major capital project actually come back and speak at the training so that providers are actually listening not just to us who are saying, yes, of course you can do this, but to listen to other providers who have actually done it and to see and hear the lessons learned and the challenges. So then after BSc, we provide follow-up training for a 2-year period with additional trainings, project-specific technical assistance, and access to financing. Again, the pre-development financing that's really necessary allows providers to hire an experienced development team, which is necessary to move these projects forward. We've held Building Stronger Centers since 2001, we've held 10 rounds of BSc. We've trained 10 to 12 providers during each round, and that's about 115 organizations, but 124 projects. So there are actually some organizations that have done more than one project. 65% of those organizations have received loans or grants from the Children's Investment Fund. And almost 50% of those projects have been completed. So the physical environment is a dimension of quality that is often overlooked. The physical environment is the setting where learning takes place and has a measurable impact on quality. So we needed to really understand what the providers were faced with every day in their spaces. So we commissioned, and Nicole spoke to this, a comprehensive study of 182 programs around the state to identify and determine whether the physical learning environment supports the educational goals for low-income children or whether the physical environment interferes with teaching and learning for children. And there were some positive findings from that study, as well as significant areas that needed to be met. So the facilities inventory led to the establishment of the Early Education and Out of School Time Capital Fund, which is EEOST, and it's a grant program that provides up to $1 million from organizations that are planning capital projects, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But I'd like to just point out a case study that we have. The photo on the left shows this was a former union hall that was built in the 1880s. It's located in Boston. This organization provides early learning and out-of-school time programming services. This building actually needed to be completely gutted. It was a historic building, but it needed to be completely gutted and redesigned for childcare. The photo on the right is the completed space. There's 117 infant, toddlers, and preschoolers that actually occupy that space. There are new furnishings, equipment. There's lots of windows in this building that bring in lots of natural light. So it's a much more inviting in space for children to actually be in for 10 hours a day. So this case study in terms of the organization that renovated that building, they actually participated in many of the services that we provide. So they attended Building Stronger Centers. Actually, they attended twice, twice because their management team changed, and so they felt that they needed to actually come back to BSc with their new team to really understand the process again. They received a project-specific technical assistance, which is really important. They accessed a pre-development loan, an acquisition loan, and grants from us. And then they were an awardee of the EEOST program. They received a large grant from that program as well. And these are all the things that are necessary. All of those pieces are really, really important in order to be successful in completing a major facilities project. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. So I'm Rusty Smith with Auburn University's Rural Studio. We're a part of Auburn University's 5-year undergraduate architecture program. As part of our program, our students leave campus and relocate and live in rural West Alabama. We love residency programs. And as part of that program, the students live and work in the community, and as part of their architectural education, design and build all kinds of community infrastructure, everything from much needing housing solutions, single-family housing solutions, upwards to including libraries, healthcare facilities, fire stations, town halls, educational facilities, lots of parks and playgrounds, and child care facilities. As an architect, and particularly community-based architect, we often sort of think about what's universal in looking at a project like this and what's particular. So if we're thinking about a national program of facility assessment, thinking about those in context become really important, and to think about it broadly is really important. For us, we represent rural concerns, and to understand, what's universal and what's particular relative to needs in rural America are important. To talk a little bit about that, we have to talk about what is rural. USDA has no fewer than 7 definitions of what's rural. They are all population-based, and I won't tell you what they all are, but they all generally come down to not urban. So it's one of those things where we know it when we see it. So what we like to talk about when we think about rural places, we talk about the sort of the circumstances that you find there, and some of those are we call these, or our friends over the Housing Assistance Council call these ruralities. First thing, rural America is really, really, really big. Really big. It's 97% of the land mass in the United States are rural counties. And about 60 million people live in those counties. That's about 20% of the population of the United States. So it's big, but it lacks density, and that's one of the fundamental problems that we have to address. It's facing significant population loss relative to urban centers. Over the 40-year period that began 20 years ago and will conclude 20 years from now, there will be a complete inversion of where people live in this country. It's fairly old. It's a rapidly aging population. We have an absence of good quality, high-performance housing stock. The average age of a home in America is 34 years old. The average age of a home in rural America is 62 years old. We're faced with all types of insecurity issues. First and foremost, food insecurity. It's startling that the place where the preponderance of our food comes from in this country are food deserts. But it includes energy insecurity, educational insecurity, health insecurity, employment insecurity, you name it, we're insecure. We lack critical infrastructure, issues of transportation, broadband, and sanitation. We have an absence of social services, including hospital, fire protection, trash pickup, the things that we sort of imagine in our daily lives. And on and on and on. The consequences of these issues result in a handful of things that are really important. Poverty is higher in rural America. Most new jobs that are being developed in the United States are not in rural America. And the incidence of health-related disabilities and those sorts of things are significantly higher in rural America. That lack of density is one of the issues that we face, in the sense that really begin to allow us to think broadly about the relationship between centralized and monolithic services. And very often when we begin to talk about center-based care, that's one of the things that we begin to talk about, versus strategically aligned and stratified services, or what we refer to as tightly aligned but loosely coupled systems, where you have a variety of community opportunities, community infrastructure that are aligned together to support those critical systems of support. I talk about these as sort of challenges, but these challenges in rural America, they actually really become opportunities for us. Rural America is surprisingly entrepreneurial, whether by necessity or by type. In communities under 2,500 people in America, which that's pretty large. We work in New Bern, Alabama, which has a population of 186. But in communities of 2,500 or less, on average in America, 234 out of every 1,000 people are self-employed. In urban centers of 250,000 or more, 121 out of 1,000 people are unemployed or self-employed. So this entrepreneurialism that exists in rural America is real. Our families, just out of necessity, live in multi-generational, intergenerational networks of kinship support. They share everything. They share transportation, housing, income, child care, elder care. That network of support becomes really important. And that relationship between child care and elder care, that can't be uncoupled in rural places is a real strategic advantage to us. The preponderance of care that happens in our rural communities is family-based care, and that actually is a tremendous opportunity. It meets the challenge of transportation needs. Typically, a family's job will be 10 miles in the wrong direction from the center. It allows a broader hours of operation that our families need. Our families often need, we work shift work, seasonal work, part-time work, multiple jobs. We often need 24-hour care, 7-day care, and overnight care. We have a broad ages that need to be served simultaneously. That lack of density creates sort of a broader spectrum of ages that need care, and that relationships between younger kids and older kids is actually a really strategic advantage. I mentioned the relationship between child care and elder care that's really important. But that close communication that exists in these small networks of communities between families and their caregivers is also a real strategic advantage in rural America. Our advocacy would be in this approach to sort of look broadly and not paint with a broad brush, whether we're looking at urban centers, ex-urban centers, suburban centers, or rural centers, but understand that there is a broad breadth of need of support in these areas, and to think, again, what's universal and what's particular, and to try to address these needs broadly throughout America.
Thanks. So first, I want to acknowledge Ms. Brown's comments at the beginning of this this panel and this discussion, because what she's facing today is what providers across the country and multiple locations are facing every day. And I'm glad that folks get a chance to hear your story, because it's an important one to hear. I also want to say that there'll be some slides that'll be cycling through behind me that are images of some facilities that the Buffett Early Childhood Fund has supported in Nebraska. I would also, on top of that, I would say that our interest is in supporting early care and education for children from birth to age 5. But our primary interest is in children and families from diminished circumstances. And unfortunately, there's a higher preponderance of those children and families that sort of get caught in this facilities cycle. There would be one here from Winnebago, which is developed an Educare Center in partnership with the Winnebago tribe in Nebraska. And to have seen where they were teaching children prior to having this facility, I would hope would make people embarrassed that this is what we were doing in America. We believe that facilities is a vital component to quality, and that we need to factor in facilities within the quality equation. It's important not only for children and families, but for staff. These are highly stressful jobs. Long hours, and we already heard about low pay, but to also then have to be working in conditions in the physical plant that are not conducive to their ability to do their jobs and for their mental health is not supporting our workforce needs. I think the solutions that need to be created have to be both public and private. I believe that the philanthropic community has a large role to play, not only in funding facilities, but also in seeding different kinds of activities, be they developing research, be that convenings, be that connecting to others within their circles to be able to help them better understand what these needs are and what these issues are and how important that it is. I think facilities also have to address a variety of settings and a variety of contexts. This supports parent choice. Families have choices, they want choices, and they want to be able to pick those, and they should not be limited based upon factors like the quality of the facility. And so we need to be able to create opportunities for families to be able to receive these services and to be in high quality facilities where they are, as opposed to having to leave their communities to be able to access high quality places. We need to promote creativity and innovation in these spaces, and I think you will see in some of the material examples of of what's, I won't name any, because when I start naming some, there'll be some that I missed that I should probably have. But we do need to be creative, and I think we need to be innovative in that. And I think there are ears out there who are ready to listen to some different approaches about how we may want to undo that. And I know right here in DC, there's some, we talked about the Bainham Foundation, really excellent examples about how folks can do that. I also, and this is an area that I haven't fully formulated in my mind yet, but I think there is an opportunity to continue to engage the broader developer community, right? The folks that are building housing developments, the folks that are doing housing, other sorts of mixed income places, to engage with them around education, but to also figure out if there are ways, as they're doing their due diligence and research, what are they assessing when they choose places? What are they assessing when they think about the partners that they want to bring into these developments? And do they have enough knowledge and information? I can tell you, at least from the architectural side, and RDG Planning and Design, based out of Omaha, has developed these particular facilities, and also several within the Educator Learning Network, and then others, they build a business in working with others in the corporate sector to build these high quality facilities. Most architects don't really know what it is to design facilities and buildings for high quality early care and education programs. They don't understand differences, everything from finishes, bathrooms, the size and the construction of the spaces. It's a learning journey for them, and I think that the private sector maybe has an opportunity in partnership with others here to help educate the developer community about what those issues are and how they can maybe be more impactful in those areas, and maybe be more open to thinking about different ways to make those developments more amenable to young children and families. And then I guess the last thing I would say is that providers need support in this area. Even within the context of the Educator Learning Network, which in comparison to some other folks in this space maybe has greater access to some capacities, technical assistance, et cetera. It's hard. It's hard to find the money. It's hard to find the land. It's hard to understand the entire development process. It's hard to connect the dots between your operations and what you're going to invest in within this building. And so even for those that appear to have high capacity, it's still a challenge. And so anything that we can do as funders, anything that we can do as a community to be able to build the capacity of the providers, to be able to engage more directly with the development community about their needs and be able to advocate for themselves as opposed to sort of taking what people want to give to you, I think is really important. So with that, I'll end my comments. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much, everyone. So I'll start by asking, when some of the facilities projects that you've mentioned have come to fruition, what kind of changes have you seen within a given center or family childcare home in terms of what level of quality practitioners are able to provide to families?
I can start, because ours go from a facility where it's not even possible to becoming a facility where you can get licensed, which means that you can also start to participate in your state's quality rating incentive system and move up in your ability to be a better educator. So it all starts with the facility actually being able to be a place for great care. A lot of the, like I was saying in the opening, a lot of the basic investments are simple things like fencing and making sure that the kitchen space is safe, and then outdoor play equipment. Those are kind of the big areas that help. But because it's a home-based, there's not as much of a huge investment in. There's some lead, testing for lead paint and lead in the water and things like asbestos, things like that. But generally is much smaller, and it puts them on such an incredible path to make their home a revenue-generating asset and to have quality environments for their family and for their program that would have never been possible before.
Thank you. Conceptually, if you think about facilities as a wrapper for program, you can then begin to see changes in student outcomes. You can begin to see changes in climate within the building, you can begin to see better performance out of teachers, and that's measurable. So, I mean, I think it's really important to think about those two as together. They're not separate tracks. They really do come together. I think as we talked, and I think all of us have acknowledged that the idea about the facility and the operations piece, they come together, but the quality, the total equation, includes facilities on top of everything else you may be doing to try to increase the skills of teachers and student outcomes.
Great. Anyone want to add?
For us, there's sort of two pieces to answer that. One, it's the success for the children. And so just, quite frankly, just providing in our community a warm, dry room in which to live in, so that young people can be cared for has a tremendous effect. So we measure that success sometimes as simply as how many of our families have first-time college students that grow up in their community. That's not always an aspiration or even something that our community can imagine. And to sort of have a place to pause for a moment and to be taken care of and to grow up in and to do homework and those sorts of things and not feel at risk are really important. I think also from the other end, it's relative to the providers, and I think you sort of touched on this, is that recognizing that what they do in the community is actually a business, that it's actually a service, that it's not just something that you do, but that it actually is a meaningful means of employment, and of which is part of a larger constellation of educational support, and to connect those home-based providers to that larger network is just eye-opening and expansive to understand that what they do is a profession that they're engaged in, is extraordinarily important. Many of our providers don't even know it. It's just what they do as good community members.
And what we see are changes, from children to the organization. So in one program, the children were in a space that was not conducive to learning at all. And when they received a new building, they, just sort of ran to the windows and looked out and said, "Wow, you built this for us." And, the parents were stunned because the parents, they didn't think that they deserved a high quality environment. And then on the organizational side, some organizations now are able to open their doors to all families in terms of whether it's private pay and, some mixed, diversity of income. And that's really important. They actually have ties to the community now. So the community is now looking at these buildings no longer as eyesores. And, some of the programs are opening up their spaces so that they can hold community meetings. And so that just changes everything. It changes the way the directors feel about the program, the families feel about the program, and the children ultimately are who we're really working for. And so if they're happy with the space that they're in, because now they can go outside and play, whereas before they didn't have a fence around their play space. So it was, hard for them to be outside unsupervised, or impossible as far as licensing is concerned. But one other thing that we're doing is an evaluation of a grant program, the EEOST grant program, and this is, we're still working on the results of it. But one thing that came out of that I can share is the researchers found that when they interviewed the providers about the impact that the facilities project, the capital project that they did, had on the environment, one thing that came out of that was there is 20 minutes more of physical activity at some of these programs because now they have indoor gross motor, and they didn't have that before, right? So if in New England, in Boston, if you're living in Boston, we all know that, it snows and it's cold and it's, just not what you want to do is to go outside. And so if you don't have indoor gross motor, the children don't have an opportunity to exercise and run around and just have fun. And so with a new facility, they were able to incorporate indoor gross motor space. And so that room has just made incredible changes to these programs. So
Great.
Can I make
Oh,
two
yeah,
quick?
please.
So on the piece about marrying the operations and the facility, in the operations side, it's really the programming and the curriculum as well. So much of what we know about 0 to 5 is about creating this environment that we guide them through to explore and help along their own development path. And so you can't really pull apart the facilities quality from the programming quality at all. And then another quick thing from our side too, with the home-based, landlords are a big part of this. And so when you were talking about eyesores, that really made a big impact, where it's like having the ability to improve the space for the landlord, it really reduces the blocks and stigma in a community against people who are running home-based childcare, to be able to feel proud of the space and the impact that you're making on your immediate community, and let more people be open to renting to you to do so. Yeah.
So how are some of the ways that you work, that communities can work in partnership around this issue, and who should be at the table when we look systemically at childcare facilities as an issue? Who should care, who should be there, and what does the coalition look like?
Well, I guess I would say everybody should care. And the coalition should include everyone, and for sure it should include providers and parents as part of these discussions within these things. I think I'm really very interested in trying to figure out how more of the traditional economic and community development vehicles that are embedded in communities and states can be opened up to include ideas around facilities to support community development and economic development. I think there's some models out there, but I think there's still some barriers around there. I think I would love to see too more work within the economic development infrastructure in your state governments, starting to align some of their policies and ideas around the incentive side that might help developers or others be able to become a part of those kinds of systems. But I think fundamentally, it is a community issue, and at all turns, we should try to get as many folks that represent that community at the table.
And go ahead, Eric. Okay. I agree with that. I do think it needs to be everyone, as many people as possible. I mean, what we find is that, housing developers, certainly, at the table, advocacy organizations, funders, licensors. Licensors are licensing these buildings, right? And it's really hard to see that, but oftentimes the provider has no other opportunity for good space, and so the licensor has to license that space. And so just getting them to the table to understand sort of design issues and what the environmental issues that occur in these spaces as well as problems. But in as many funders as possible at the table to really understand the need and the issue, and why financing is really, really important, and how they can actually make a difference by investing in these centers and family home child care providers as well.
Yeah, and I would add to that, employers, businesses should be at the table. We've started to engage with the chambers of commerce in each of the areas that we're starting to expand into, as they can bring realtors and business owners and start to get a voice with funders to get a voice, because to your point, everyone's affected, but employers feel it very acutely.
I wish just to be a contrarian, I would say not everybody, but obviously the answer is everybody. Another reason I would give, an additional reason, is that we need the people who need childcare.
Yeah.
That is our workforce. That is America's workforce. The children who are in that care is our upcoming workforce. That's our future. So whether we have children or not, whether we have a lot of money or not, we need good, adequate, high-performing child care in this country. It is our future.
And the cost of it is across all income levels. I don't care how much you're making.
Yep. Yeah.
It is taking a high percentage of your income to be able to do to send your kids to child care. And so I tend to think there's maybe a broader coalition than we think of folks, including grandparents who are taking their kids with them a couple of days a week because their kids can't afford to pay for childcare.
Well, we always think about what it costs to do this, and we very rarely think about the cost of inaction. What does it cost not to do it? And that's the cost that's really borne. It's not borne just by the parent who has to deal with it. It's borne by the employer. It's borne by all of us in these sort of hidden cost of what it costs to not address this issue immediately and into the future.
Agreed.
All right, so with that, I'm going to invite Patricia back up, and we'll be able to take a few questions. Oh, sorry, forgot about that. We'll be able to take a few questions from the audience. You can start right back there with you. Thank you.
I knew I was going to do that. Tipped over. Thank you. Hi, my name is Lauren Robertson. I work at Child Care of America, but I'm also a former teacher in the universal pre-K system here in DC. I literally made a list of all the facility issues we had, including air conditioning breaking in August, mold in my classroom, an ant infestation, my former school flooded. The air quality was so bad that the Department of Health wouldn't let us back in, and it is currently in the middle of an active construction zone, so the noise is sometimes so loud that the kids can't go outside. So this is an issue I really am passionate about. So as cities and states go more toward, or invest in universal pre-K systems for 3 and 4-year-olds, often to the detriment of birth to 3, as we know. How do we push these lessons up to public school districts and charter schools? Because they should be held to the same standards as licensing requirements, and that, birth to 3 centers and family child care homes are held to. So how do we push that up and ensure that even if our families are benefiting from free pre-K, that their families are not sending their kids to ant-infested 98-degree active construction zones as well. And I don't think this is limited to DC. So, but but it is happening. So.
Thank you. You would like to jump in?
I'll start. As a provider here in the city, we actually have a coalition that is working to move the Birth to 3 Act forward, and we are actively engaging political folks, everyone that will listen, business partners. We're having an open house in a few weeks, and we're inviting everybody, developers, funders, political entities, so that they fully understand the cost that's involved and the lack of equity in some instances. So you mentioned charter schools. We actually considered becoming a charter school just because there's a per child pupil ratio for facilities funding that we don't get as a community-based organization. So I think continuing to carry the message, forums like this are critical so that people hear and understand what's really going on.
Yeah, I'm gonna say in some ways my instinctive answer is embedded in your question of how do we push it up. I think that's how you do it, is you push it up. These kinds of change, I don't think just happen from the top down. I do think they move up. We operate, in the rural place that we're in, there's such a vacuum for services. There's such a great space to innovate and do things innovative that can't be done in other places. So to increase a parent's or a community's expectations in early childhood development and in child care and early child education, just those expectations won't go away as we move up into sort of middle school and high school. So setting those expectations early and pushing them up is probably part of that answer.
It's maybe it can't work everywhere, but because whether it's facilities or whether it's programming, right, you still want to sort of push up, right, into the public school system, developing appropriate ways as opposed to trying to push a K through curriculum down, right? That's what you really want to have. So in Nebraska, for example, there's a program called, that's now been branded Sixpence, which is a public-private partnership to fund 0 to 3 in the state. To get the money, you have to do it in partnership with the public school system, right? So now the public school is a partner with a community-based provider doing 0 to 3. That creates some opportunities for some learning. That creates some opportunities for them to be more observant of how that works within that context, and hopefully maybe influence the way that they think about what needs to happen as they're doing more pre-K in their own school systems.
My name's Frank. I've had 45 years of affordable housing development. In the early days, we paid no attention to social services and those kind of things. Now we are trying to do service-enriched housing. To comment and then maybe a reaction. We're able now to get the space built and build it well in new or rehab projects. The challenge, I noticed you talked about facilities being out of date. The challenge is to get the money in the operating budget of the property. We're partners in a 406 unit deal, HUD deal, and we're going to be refinancing, and we're going to make sure we get operating funds and rehab funds for the services in the operating budget. But many states are forcing this, but it's always a challenge because that's against the need for security. So I don't know if there's any reaction to that.
I would just say it's absolutely true. In the world that we live in, working with the reinvestment fund, we had to do a robust business plan, feasibility study, and while we're looking to improve the facility, the other question is the maintaining and the building funds that need to happen along with it. So I would just say absolutely.
My name is Ralph Kaufman. I'm with the Council of Chief State School Officers, and formerly I was with the Maryland State Department of Education, and we work closely with the school construction office within the state. And so a lot of school construction takes place on land that's on the public domain. That means there's a lot of space in addition to the elementary school that is being built, where there are opportunities to include early childhood centers on the ground that obviously have children then feeding into the elementary school. This allows for leveraging funds through the school construction funds that are available at the state level, and then have the community chip in or any private institution chip in the rest of it. There were some examples out there, and I was wondering whether you're working with funding models that include or leverage means to get into existing funding models that support school construction that would then extend down to developing facilities on properties that are on the public domain that could be linked to construction of schools.
That's a great question.
Do you do that?
Anyone?
So I guess I can say that in Lincoln, Nebraska, where I actually live, in the Buffer Early Childhood Fund is based out of Omaha. They are in the planning stages for to do a the word's going to slip my mind, a bond issue, right, to build some more schools. And as part of the planning process, they are considering how might they include pre-K spaces within that context. So there is discussion about it, but at the end of the day, the concern, even for the school district, is how am I going to fill those classrooms? How am I going to pay for them, right? And in some places where you have dedicated funding for pre-K, that maybe that works. In some other places, it's going to be much more of a challenge. You would have to partner with community-based providers, which is not always the easiest thing for a school district to do.
And that's happening in Boston, in some other communities in Boston as well, in Massachusetts as well, where there is this collaboration between the community-based organizations and the schools, so that, you know, as these schools are accepting 3- and 4-year-olds, that, you know, they're really pulling from the community-based organizations. And so there was this acknowledgement a number of years ago, and then some federal funding that actually allowed that to happen, for the schools to actually place like 1 or 2 classrooms and fund that particular classroom in the community-based organization. So that has been successful, and hopefully we'll see that continue. So,
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you to the audience for your great questions. Thank you to our panel for that great discussion and for the incredible work you're doing, the incredible innovation that all of you are responsible for in the early childhood space. At this time, I'd love to call up and introduce Jonathan Harwitz, the Managing Director for Federal Policy and Government Affairs at the Low Income Investment Fund, for some closing remarks.
Thank you so much. I just want to start off by saying another quick word. As was mentioned, I'm from the Low Income Investment Fund. We got a wonderful shout out from Patricia earlier. We are also a CDFI, and we have invested about $153 million over our history in over 250,000 child care slots. But it's a team effort, as we've heard here, working with Patricia, working with Reinvestment Fund. We work with LISC in many instances. But I'm here to talk about what's the punchline, what are the policy recommendations that we want to make. But I want to start off by saying just a quick word of thanks to Linda and her team at the Bipartisan Policy Center. I see Sarah, Megan, Kathleen, and Arabella there. So appreciate the work that they've done. And I've been doing policy for 20 years, and it was interesting. I was just thinking that if someone came down from Mars and you said, and they asked, well, you have some really big problem that you want to solve, and you want to figure out the public policy to do it, how would you do that? Well, probably first you talk to everybody involved in the problem and get all the different perspectives and think about all the various interests that are there, and take however much time it needs to come up with the right solution. And then that solution would not be a surprise. I am not a Game of Thrones fan myself, but I understand some people were disappointed by the conclusion. Surprise and disappointment isn't what you want to have for the policy solution. Well, spoiler alert, policy often isn't formulated that way. But Linda and her team ran a process, and you saw it here today, that pulled together all the stakeholders. And my hope is, as I move forward to talk about the policy solutions, that none of this is going to be a surprise to anybody. So if I can just get the, oh, I see I have the next slide. So our goal was really to respond to as many of the needs as you heard about today in our proposal. And the first thing that you heard about is the need. And we need a national assessment. Teresa and others shared, what's been done so far. It's not enough. We want a national assessment of the need. The Department of Health and Human Services has the experience if they get the funding to do it, so we're calling on Congress to do that. But we're not waiting to make an investment. And it's funny, I had all sorts of words to say why we shouldn't wait to make an investment, but I think the pictures at the beginning of the show show we need an investment now, a down payment in the facilities challenge to help move the ball forward. So let me just get the next slide up if I could. So you all have, and it's available online, a detailed description of our policy proposal, but I'm just going to hit a couple of highlights. First, the money. We think $250 million is a very significant down payment. It won't meet the full need, but it is very much in line with the kind of bipartisan support there has been for early childhood investments, including in preschool development grants of that amount. So we're calling on Congress and the administration to provide that level of funding. And it has two key elements to it. One is money that would flow to states, and we're proposing, given the size of the pot, that these be competitively awarded. Money to states along a continuum of capacity. Often when we talk to policymakers, and I've been on both sides, I've been staff to Congress and in administration, when you say competition, people immediately think, oh, the same people are going to get the money. And the only people who ever get it are the ones who are high capacity and they can hire grant writers. That's not what we're interested in doing. We're interested in supporting states that are along the continuum, but do show a commitment to addressing their facilities challenge. And then second, we're proposing to have a national activities fund that can help intermediaries like LIF, like LISC, CDFIs that have played a role in helping both government and providers. I think you kind of heard that there's a major gap to be bridged, both from the provider capacity perspective, because, you know, I have yet to meet somebody who went into early childhood education to do a complicated real estate project. And the problem is that that's what you end up with, and Patricia's nodding over here. At the same time, government is designed very well to do certain things. Retailing grants to small providers is not one of them. CDFIs and other intermediaries are good at that, and we have models from the child care sector and in other areas to do that. So that's the second piece that we're looking for. And I think finally, the point I would just remake again, you know, notwithstanding Rusty's contrarianism, there is a role for everybody here. And we have people, suspects that should be involved. I'll follow up with both of the questioners because I have a strong background in housing as well as school financing. We need the state housing finance agencies. We need the school construction agencies all involved in this problem, as well as philanthropy and others. So if you're watching on the webcast here, there's a role for you and for everybody in the audience. And with that, I'll stop.
Well, I just don't know how to even begin to thank people for everything that they've done along the way. And again, thank the 42 organizations or more that are working with us. And a reminder to the audience and to the people watching online to take a look at the catalog of ideas and to send us more ideas if you have them and you think you can add to the conversation on this. I want to also take a minute to acknowledge that we had what we were very excited about, 3 watch parties going on around the country of groups who got together to have discussions around facilities. One of them, the Children's Investment Fund, another one, Studio MLA, and LISC in Rhode Island, all had watch parties with conversations to follow. So we'll be anxious to hear from them and encourage others in the future to think about doing a watch party around some of these conversations that we have. I want to take a minute to thank the staff. I thank you for acknowledging the staff. We've got a great staff of people here at BPC who have been working on this, primarily Sarah Tracy, who's headed this particular effort up for us, and Arabella Pluta Ehlers, who's over here on the side. And they've really done a yeoman's job of bringing this whole thing together and getting these documents into final form. I want to do a couple of things before I close. One of them is to give a shout out to the Fannie Mae Development Corporation, who right now are sponsoring a Sustainable Communities project. And if you haven't gone online and looked at that, I encourage you to do that, because for the first time they've included early childhood as one of the criteria that they will be judging the competition on this year. So if you haven't looked at it, go look at it and participate, because it again is looking at housing and community development things which we want to get ourselves into. And then finally, I just want to thank the other people in the audience who are listening to this and hoping that around the country this will stimulate some conversation. Hope you will take a look at the congressional recommendations that we're making, and that if you think you can, to support these with your congressmen, your representatives around the country, get this issue on the radar screen. We see the $250 million as an investment in something that is very important for this country, and it is a down payment, but it's something we think will incentivize other things to happen around the country in states. So I want to close by saying one thing, that I think you saw the good, the bad, and the ugly on the slides today. And I want to say that I think our goal here at BPC and with the working group is pretty simple. We want to move this whole early childhood community from a culture of good enough to great. And our children and our country deserve that. So with that, I thank everyone who watched and participated, sent us ideas, have encouraged us along the way, and we are this is just the beginning of the project. Don't worry, we have a lot more to come, and we want to keep everyone engaged with us. So thank you all, and hope you have a great day, and thanks again to the listening parties out there.